Hello, I'm Peter Junho Sang, founder and CEO of Beyond Form, and welcome to the special series Build It, where I speak to founders and their clients as to how they're building fashion technologies. This series gives you a glimpse into topics such as personal struggles, technical challenges, working in fashion, and more. On this first episode, I speak to Abdul Moiz Sajjad, the CEO of WeMetrix. I've been working with Abdul for nearly 12 months now, and in that time I've just learned so much as to how factories can be made more efficient simply with the use of data. However, it's not an easy task, and for factories especially based in Pakistan, where WeMetrix is also based.
All those decision making is basically done on the basis of data. And in a matter of no time, we could see that the manufacturing facilities efficiencies, which used to be somewhere around 40 or 45%, remarkably jumped to 70%. And all along this time, we were of this view that, only the newer machines are going to improve the efficiency. And they proved us wrong.
Let's get this episode underway with Abdul on venturing into fashion tech. How are you today, Abdul?
I'm good, Peter. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So looking forward to today's conversation. We've been working together now for nearly a year with Beyond Form and WeMetrix. Today's episode is all about the supply chain, fashion production, and how potentially WeMetrix can actually help the industry to become more digitized and more sustainable and more automated and efficient in many, many ways. But before we get stuck into the conversation itself, I just want to give the listeners some context as to the subject itself. So WeMetrix is based in Pakistan. And in terms of the country itself, it exported $16.5 billion worth of textiles and garment goods in 2022 and 2023. This accounts for 59.5% of total exports from the country, and that's according to Fiber2 Fashion. So as we can see, this industry is very integral to the country. The sheer number and volume itself as well is huge. That's a huge portion of the global market in terms of exports. It's the bread and butter of your industry. But of course, that also comes with challenges itself, namely climate change, sustainability, ethics, which we'll get into in the conversation today. In terms of the EU, obviously, where Beyond Form is partly based, it is the largest export market for Pakistan when it comes to raw materials, yarns, such as cotton, and so forth. It sees Pakistan being the third largest exporter to the bloc, according to Avantage. So again, talking about exports and where it's going, the EU has a huge responsibility to ensure that the supply chain within fashion can function properly. And of course, that the future of fashion and Pakistan and the supply chain can effectively keep on going forward. Obviously, with temperatures reaching 50 degrees on your side of the world, Celsius this year, that is disrupting the supply chain so much. And there has been a lot of conversation about, can factories still run in such extreme conditions? I think that's going to be an interesting topic later on. Pakistan is a production powerhouse, especially for Western brands. We rely on it so much, but it's also very opaque. There is little transparency or traceability. And coupled with climate change, the country's supply chains are on the thread. So is it pushing the fashion supply chain to the edge? So food for thought there. But before we get into those quite deep conversations, shall we say, I want to know a little bit more about you, Abdul. What was life growing up in a country that is so reliant on production and exporting goods? How did it shape your view of the world?
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Peter, and thank you so much for telling a bit about us and a lot about, obviously, the industry and economic situation of Pakistan. Like you said, Peter, so more than 50% of our exports are based on fashion industry. The trend has been as such over the last couple of years that previously the country was solely exporting raw materials in terms of yarn, cotton for that matter. And then it has, very recently, it became a realization for the entire industry that they probably need to enter into more value-added services, such as the export of garments So that is why you see this. There's a certain rise in the number of garment manufacturing facilities popping up all across Pakistan. And you know what? We have the raw materials in abundance, and obviously it's a country of 420 million people. What that essentially means is that most of those people are looking for jobs, and so that, if you look at from a business perspective, put Pakistan in an ideal situation, further delve into this industry. Like you mentioned, it also has uh, effects, the environmental effects as well. So yes, the industry has been tackling both the problems and moving through this. As somebody growing up, uh, especially on the tech side, so I was an electrical engineer, and then I started working in manufacturing industry. I personally felt two things. One is that fashion industry in general uh, has a lot of opportunity for improvement, and then if you really want to do something for your country, then this was particularly the industry in which you wanted to contribute, because that can actually change the scale of things in Pakistan and can provide a humongous opportunity in terms of people, in terms of creating job. And at the same time, I would say that there is a lot to be done in terms of creating awareness for brands, for consumers about the effects or precautions that must be exercised uh, for your decision or for your choice of fashion.
And then as a child, Abdul, did you just see factories everywhere? Just give some context to our listeners. Like, where are you based? How did that come across to you as a child? You mentioned there that it is such a prevalent industry. So did that influence you in any way?
So you see, me growing up, I used to live in the older part of the Lahore. There's smaller manufacturing facilities all across the city. When you're growing up, your exposure is sort of limited to those small scale manufacturing facilities. And then when you grow up, you get to work in some of the bigger facilities. Like I happen to work for an MNC. So yes, fashion in some form or another is all across Pakistan. So there are different markets. There are people who, some styles are very inherent to Pakistan. So you see them existing in some form of or another, because in fact, I would say that even in the for very, that's like one of the basic ways for people to earn money. I mean, there are a lot of women who would practice this at their home, stitching clothes for people. Yes, the exposure to industry did exist in I would say, uh, at a very grassroots level. But then obviously, when you start understanding how manufacturing works, you start figuring out that there is a gap that exists in this market, especially for Pakistan.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting because obviously in the West here and for Western consumers, we kind of know where garments are made. A lot of it is made in Asia. But when we think about it, we don't really know to what extent it affects the country. When I was growing up, I had family factories out in China, and I always say to everybody, until you've really been to a fashion factory or a garment factory in some rural countryside, in my case China, you don't really see or realize just what a different world it is, the conditions that people are putting themselves in just to survive. And as you say there, a lot of people need jobs and they want to take jobs, and therefore they take it in fashion factories just because it is a very viable way to make money. But all of these, shall we say, it's to be whatever word, ignorance from this side of the world doesn't necessarily make the situation very easy. But let's just go back to you again, Abdul. So you said that actually you're trained as an electrical engineer. So in my head, the two things with fashion and engineering, electrical engineering, have nothing in common. You went then into tobacco manufacturing. Did you just wake up one day? I was like, okay, I am going to work and acquire WeMetrix and start working in the fashion world. Like, how did that happen?
So that's a very interesting story. When I was working with this, the first job of mine in this tobacco industry, it's a global MNC, and they undertook this project of digitizing their factories all across the world. And probably I think MNCs are a little ahead. In fact, they are. So they realizing the potential of this, they undertook a global operation where they completely revamped the factories when it comes to monitoring of production, uh, using sensors and using computers and using all these analytical tools. So all those decision making is basically done on the basis of data. And in a matter of no time, we could see that the manufacturing facilities efficiency, which used to be somewhere around 40 or 45%, remarkably jumped to 70%. And all along this time, we were of this view that, only the newer machines are going to improve the efficiency. And they proved us wrong. They changed the way we work. They made it entirely on the basis of data that we used to get and do steps analytically. So that was one thing that actually, like it struck me personally so heavily that when you see something in action and you experience something firsthand, your belief sort of strengthens up on that particular agenda or uh, technology for that matter. So if I have to implement that understanding that I was able to get, the industry that was in abundance is the apparel and textile industry in Pakistan. And not just being in abundance of the apparel and textile industry or local manufacturing industry for that matter is way behind what the MNCs or where MNCs are. And so that have kind of highlighted not just a business opportunity, but as well as something in which where I personally felt that I can contribute and I can create a mark. And that is how, with the information of manufacturing and with the market being in abundance, we thought, okay, let's get into this market. Let's see what we can do for them. And what started off as, you can say, an implementation for one factory, we started figuring out the amount of inefficiency or the need that people have for this solution was immense. And it was not just the city, it was not just this country. And in fact, sooner or later, we realized it's a global problem. And so that is how WeMetrix, from one factory to now a global entity, has evolved. As you go along the way, your understanding also evolves, and the problems sort of also, your perspective evolves of those problems. So that has been a great journey for us. So yeah, that's where the inspiration came from, the tobacco industry, and that's how the experience sort of eventually ended up being contributed to the fashion industry.
So is it your personal mission then to try and solve all of fashion's supply chain's problems?
I think yes, because you see, apart from being a business reason, I think everybody looks to strive to create an impact in their life. I personally feel that it's a good cause. It's a cause that has both uh, the financial aspects as well as environmental aspects as well, and then you can actually end up doing good for a lot of people. Fashion industry is probably one of those industry that actually connects to very different classes of people. And I think if you can do something good in that, if you can create a bit of transparency in that, then you can do a lot of good for the entire world. Consumption of fashion is something that has been there since the existence of humans. So that is something that is going to continue for long. And I think if you can sort of contribute even a little bit to this whole industry, I think that's a great cause to live for.
So what is WeMetrix then?
So WeMetrix itself is a fashion production tracking solutions. As a company, we basically wish to eliminate the inefficiencies from this entire process, create transparency for uh, about the operations, as well as reduce inefficiencies for manufacturers. And what it ultimately does it for them, it improves their profitability. You only don't need to create the value, you also need to show the value to all the players that are a part of, that are the stakeholders of this. So that is why Biometrics as a company has started out working with manufacturers. We promise them greater profitability, and we do that through a number of things. We digitize them, we make sure we were paperless, we make sure their operational efficiencies improve, and we make sure that their rejections and their defects they reduce. And once they end up doing that, they not only reduce their carbon footprint, because you see, we keep talking about Paris Accord, and what that says is that there is almost a billion tons of carbon emissions that the industry is producing, which are above the target, 75% of that is coming from fashion manufacturing. Now, what you got to do is you have to look at manufacturing and you have to look at the ways that how you can reduce the inefficiencies in this particular segment. And if you do that, you will not only make it more profitable for the manufacturer, but you will also reduce the carbon footprint. And I think if you look at the bigger problem, then I would say that even what CS3D or these compliances are going to do is we sort of need to create transparency for everyone because you see, manufacturers inherently are not at fault, I would say. There is not enough consciousness that exists in the market as of today. Or I would say there are not enough means to sort let that information get through brands or eventually end consumers. So that puts us in a company as a position that yes, we make sure that the market is willing to solve this problem as one, and everybody contributes, everybody talks about it, everybody says what they can do, how we can generate more demand of more sustainable fashion, how brands can regulate that demand, and how we enable manufacturers to sort of help them cut their carbon emissions and produce more friendly, more sustainable fashion for the rest.
So obviously, to have that conversation, though, we need to understand what's happening on the factory floor. We need to have those insights. You mentioned the inefficiencies and trying to solve them. Again, to do that, we actually need to have data to make that happen before we can make an informed decision as to how to move forward. So, in this scenario, in what ways and how and why is data so important within the fashion supply chain? And quite often, I think that the fashion supply chain managers, product developers, I think they know that something is happening there, but we don't actually know what data is there and how we can use it.
I would answer that question. I would answer it in two parts, like what to expect, what is going to change, what are the tools we have as of today. I would say, luckily, today, as a human race, we are at a point where we have the means to address this issue. And those means are in tech. So the technology is something that has come so far that if we use it properly, if the manufacturing sector uses it properly, these are addressable challenges. This is not a challenge that I personally feel is unaddressed. It's just that not enough attention has been given to it. If we, like I said, all stakeholders are on the same side of it, then I'm sure that the solution to this exists. So now we sort of have to understand what kind of change it is. You see, as humans, we're all well aware of incremental changes, and we experience it in our lives, and all of us, even in our careers or even in our personal lives, we all uh, see incremental changes. But over here, we are not talking about incremental changes. This is a radical change. This is a radical change that we have to embrace. And I love giving the example of the Japan Railways and when they introduced the, the train back in, I think, 1958 or 68. I can't exactly remember the date. But when the Japan Railways gave this task to their team that, the train that used to be somewhere around 50, 60 kilometers per hour speed, they said, what we want you to make a train that goes at 200 kilometers per hour. Why I'm quoting this example is because you see it when in this example they did not only have to have a better engine, they have to look at the problem in a very different way. They have to reimagine all the components of them. They have to reimagine that they, in order to have this radical change implemented, they looked at it as they need wider tracks, or they need more better aerodynamics, or the engine efficiency has to be improved as well. So that's the kind of change that we're talking about, a radical change. And frankly speaking, we don't even have to do a lot of brainstorming for that. From the last couple of years, the industry experts have already been talking about it. They're already, and that is not only just related to apparel or textile or fashion industry for that matter. It's a global change in manufacturing that is just around the corner, and that's called the fourth industrial revolution. There's a reason it's called industrial revolution because over the past three revolutions, the steam revolution or the assembly line revolution, and the last revolution, which was about semiconductors, every revolution is called a revolution because it drastically changes the outlook of the industry. And this fourth industrial revolution is also going to drastically change the industry. And if being used correctly, then that even can eliminate a lot of inefficiencies from the industry. So, with that understanding in our mind that the manufacturing itself is going for a huge change, and there are reasons for that. I take this bit of time to basically tell people that why industrial revolution on manufacturing is around the corner now and not 20 years ago. Because you see, a lot of industries have changed over the last 20 years. Banking, you imagine 20 years, banking 20 years ago and today drastically changed. Rental industry 20 years ago, today you got Uber, you got Airbnb, you got all things. Rental industry has media industry, you got Netflix and all that, and everything has changed. So now manufacturing 20 years ago and today is almost the same. Why is the same or why it did not change? Because manufacturing is about a lot of data. Manufacturing is about a lot of information. Even the T-shirt that I'm wearing, as basic as that, has more than 40 operations that has to be done upon itself before it goes out. Every operation needs to know who did it, where it was done, what was the material it was done, how much time it took to be done. The information is just humongous. And two things have changed over the last 10 years that have brought this revolution on the brink. One is the introduction of IoT devices. So now we have IoT devices available. What that means is that previously the only way to monitor the data was either to use a personal computer or to have the PLCs from local brands that cost humongous amount. Now these IoT devices are very cheap and you can install it at a number of places across the country to track a particular product. The second thing that has changed drastically over the last 5-10 years is the cost of data storage. I still remember having an MP3 player that my brother brought from UK. It was 256 MB, and you could plug in a headphone in that, and I think you could have what, like hundreds of, I think that's even a
Yeah,
lot.
something along those lines, like very small amount of numbers, like unfathomable now.
So now you have smaller SD cards than an 8
Yeah.
GB number. And start talking about cloud storage, immensely cheap. So those two things have basically put the industry on a the brink of change that now they can get the data from the flow and they can store that data. And you see, one thing that is now changing in a lot of ways, we will see a lot of people talking about AI. This fourth industrial revolution has one component of AI and that is going to change it. And you need to understand that what are the pillars of this change. So the pillars of this change are getting the data from floor in real time. The second pillar of that is big data analytics. Big data analytics means that you don't make a decision on the basis of what you are seeing today or in a week or in a month. You understand, you figure out the trends in that, and then you make a call. On the basis of this real time data and this big data analytics lies your artificial intelligence. Just like any experienced person or any person you meet, uh, in their experience is basically based on the data that they've been able to get in their entire lives. They have the big data analytics going on in their head. That is the same case with AI. And in order to continually feed it, in order to have the latest insights, you need this data from slower in real time. So with that in place, so with the industrial revolution going on with the introduction of AI, the manufacturing is going to change, and so it's going to change for apparel and textile fashion industry as well. With that in consideration, you must know that what are the changes it can bring. It can actually help you improve your operational efficiency. It can actually help you be more agile. It can actually help you improve, work better on your planning and capacity. And then obviously the biggest of them all is uh, the data-driven intelligence, the automated decision making, because that is going to revolutionize the industry. All those tedious decisions that previously took a lot of time to be taken will be done quickly.
So you talk about there the industrial revolutions. That was a very brief history, shall we say, history lesson there that we had. We now know that obviously the industrial revolutions have contributed towards climate change. Of course, we are, as you said there, we are putting out a lot of carbon emissions as an industry, and we now know that is a cause of that, or one of the causes, shall we say. It is a pressing issue for the fashion industry, especially when we're talking about sustainability, but it seems like brands and governments aren't necessarily working enough with manufacturing hubs, like in Pakistan, for example, where you're based, or with people like yourself trying to make it a little bit more efficient to make climate action goals a reality. We now know as well that we're not going to hit our targets as well. You mentioned there the Paris Accord. As I mentioned in the introduction to this episode, temperatures on your side of the world reached between 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. I can't even imagine what it's like going to work in such extreme heat. I can imagine you were sweating out down in such an extreme temperature. I know that you have AC in your office, but I'm not sure how effective the AC actually was. You must have been dying, right?
So I think so far what we've talked about is how the manufacturing needs to make itself more efficient. In particular, talking about what lies ahead for fashion is actually the the insights that we have to get and deliver to the consumer and the brands. And I think that is where the importance of a data platform comes. If I look at my perspective before visiting any apparel factory and after visiting, it's hugely different.
Mhm.
You have this glossy image of a factory where uh, probably one garment is made at a time, one garment is packed at a time, and then delivered to the store. In reality, that is a very environmentally intensive procedure.
Mm.
And I think what, as a customer, you don't understand is that two garments from the same brand, probably of the same material, with different finishes, different shade of, or with different washes, technically speaking, have different carbon footprints. And the data platform that is the requirement of the world right now is that a data platform must exist in this entire supply chain that eventually tells the end customer that, what, if you buy this garment, it will have this much amount of carbon footprint, and if you buy this one, then it will have lesser impact. So they can make informed decision. I think that's the least the world goes to the consumer of fashion is the information that what their choice actually means. And then so we can start dropping back from this 50 degree centigrade temperature
Yeah.
to 49 and 40. And I think that that is the only way as long as the demand exists, there's little you can do about it. But if you create awareness, then only the awareness is not going to solve this problem. You also need to give them the information that, and I think this is what CS3D and digital product passport is all about. When I see them speaking of this legislation, I see a lot of confusion in their mind as well because they are the legal experts. They are not the operational experts. And like I said, it can be as complex as two t-shirts of the same brand, different shades, having different packs. So you need a platform that basically monitors the carbon footprint right from the yarn stage to, I would say, the gray fabric stage, dyeing stage, or the cutting and wash and packing. Every step of the way, it has to be monitored. Just one last thing that I'd like to add is that we also need to create this understanding uh, in consumers as well that what sort of industry structure do we have? Like brands usually don't own factories. Most of them don't own factories. The biggest problem I see as a part of this industry is that constant pressure that we like to put on the manufacturers. They are just, everybody's putting the pressure on manufacturers. They have a business and they have these requirements from customers that they have to meet. And they have each factory has 2,000, 3,000 people to feed. And that's not an easy business to do, frankly speaking. I mean, when I look at them struggling, when I look at them handling day-to-day challenges, especially to the part of the world they belong to, I think it can be very challenging for them. So we have to step in their shoes. We have to understand that how can we help these manufacturers? What sort of technology do we have to provide them? What sort of requirements do we have to provide this? And then we create this transparency to the end consumer, and then channel the demand in such a way that it's a win-win situation for everyone.
Right. But to give information to the customers, I completely agree that, the Western consumers should be given information so that they can understand actually what's happening. Of course, we know as well, especially with Gen Z, they are wanting to purchase goods that are maybe more sustainable, more ethical, and so forth. But still, I feel that there's like a disconnect between knowing that information and, as you said there, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. I can imagine, trying to work in a factory that is, 50 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Celsius, whatever it is extremely difficult. I can imagine that it impacted your clients in such a drastic way that us on this side of the world can't even fathom.
So you see, I mean, that puts the manufacturers under greater pressure because, frankly speaking, I mean, some of the factories they have installed air conditioners or chillers on the floors just to make sure that the situation is uh, bearable. I would say if they have to produce quality garments at the end of the day, and who's going to make those quality garments? So people are going to make the quality garments, and quality is something that does not come from by forcing someone. Quality is something that is very inherent to people. You need to understand that despite the fact that Pakistani population is not the end consumer of that carbon footprint, and or they have very little contribution in terms of consuming that carbon footprint. Most of it is coming from the West, and I think so does the responsibility shift as well.
And I think climate change is obviously only one aspect with the tough conditions of a factory floor. I think you and I can talk about this all day long. For our listeners, just in context, I used to work in product development and fashion production and working with factories out in China. When you have a client that says, I want this order by X date, you cannot be late. Otherwise, I'm going to fine you. That you have no other choice but to work through those conditions. The factory workers that I was working with, they were doing a 12-hour shift. If they didn't finish their garment line, they'd do overtime for another 1, 2 hours, whatever it is. You see them taking naps on the factory floor. They're working 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, depending on the workload of that factory. And it is tough. And I think we really don't realize that when we're purchasing our goods. When customers are going to Primark buying their £5 top, in London, that is just, there's such a big disconnect. And yeah, we won't go into that subject right now because that is a whole other topic. But if you could do something in a very short 1 minute rally cry, what is your rally cry to the fashion industry for the supply chain to be more transparent and to be, working a little bit more effective?
I think, like I said before, we need to make the end consumer uh, informative enough. We need to provide them enough information to be responsible for their choice. And you can only do that if you have the means to tell them that what their choice actually means. And that is you can do through mapping the carbon footprint of any garment throughout the supply chain. You have to start right from the raw materials, and then at every step of the manufacturing there is utility consumption, there is water consumption, there's steam consumption. uh, today we have today we have the solutions to do that. Today we can monitor uh, the carbon footprint at every point in time and at every stage of the production, and tell the end consumer that this is the choice, this is the cost of your choice. So people also start looking not just at the price tag but at the carbon tag, and then make that choice. And I know people, and I know deep down people are all good. People are all responsible. People want to make good choices, but just that you have to provide them the right information. And now we have this legislation that is coming ahead. All we need to do is we need to find the right technology to go with that. And probably they need to start just looking into technologies to have the best out of this legislation. That's all I have to say for that.
Yeah, so it's about choosing the best thing, essentially. So on that note, I want to finish off this episode with a quick fire round of questions. So the first answer that comes to your head, Abdul, are you ready?
No.
Okay, we'll get through it anyway. Which is more important, transparency or traceability?
I think they're the same. You can't have transparency without visibility.
That is very true. So maybe traceability needs to come first before transparency can happen. One word to describe the state of fashion production.
Carbon intensive.
Hardest thing about being an entrepreneur.
Changing the market.
Biggest tip, factories looking to integrate data analytics to their factory floors.
Real-time data analytics.
One advice for anyone looking to get into fashion supply chain.
I think I would say try to understand the market, try to understand where it's heading, and then create a positive change for that, because people, the end consumers, are looking for one.
Thank you so much for your time, Abdul, for today's conversation.
Thank you, Peter. It was lovely talking to you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to click follow to keep up to date with the latest episodes. And if you like this episode, please give us a review. If you want us to feature a specific theme or guest, please give us a message at beyondform.io. I will see you very soon.